Alright, kicking off week 20 on the Corvette build, and we're actually starting today's filming on a Friday afternoon. Bobby got the crank all balanced for us, top job of course. It turned out we didn't need Mallory metal. This actually needed some weight taken out of it, so that's a good thing. It gives us a bit more of a lighter rotating mass than having pucks of Mallory in there, so that was all good. But on Wednesday we got it back, we loaded it into the block and started fitting the front timing cover on, and we found that the new crank, it's been machined down now, the new crank had a bigger shoulder. It came out about, I think it was 12 mil further. So when we put the gear on and went to put the timing cover, this gear was sitting out and it didn't line up with the gear drive or anything. So we had to pull the crank all back out again, get it back off to Bobby, and he's taken that shoulder down, so now the gear's going to line up. We should be able to put it together this time for good. But in the 30 years of our racing, I'm the only person that's ever built the motor in the cars. I don't let anybody touch anything. I mean, in recent years, Connor's been helping me out for maybe 5 or 6 years, and I'm finally letting go now and letting him do a lot of stuff on the engines, but I just cannot, no one has ever put a rod in any of my engines. I do everything myself. Even to this day, I do the rockers on both cars. Nobody touches the rockers. I have to do them because it's just how I am. So we'll get this one back together and see if we can make it go as fast as all the other ones are gone. As you can see, there's no surgical suits or doctor's gloves or anything, or even an engine building room. We just get everything reasonably nice and clean, and it's all just done in the same shed where everything else gets done. So there's a bit of a myth that you've got to have this controlled environment and everything, but half the time we build the car at the track in between rounds. We've done that before. And when Bobby checked the crank out for us, he found that the new crank was a little bit bigger. So to get the nice loose clearances that we want for a boosted engine, we've gone for extra clearance bearings in the main. So in effect, the bearing's actually a little bit smaller, it's a little bit looser in diameter to make up for that extra crankshaft. So if you were building a road car, you would have 1 thou per inch of crankshaft. So if you've got a 2.2 crankshaft, you would have 2.2 thou of bearing clearance. In a big boosted motor like this, we're looking more for 4 thou of bearing clearance, just to allow for all the growth and any mistakes that get made in the tune-up. So yeah, extra clearance bearings. And another little point with this CM block we've got here, the original main oil gallery doesn't line up, so we've had to drill, well, every time we get a new set of bearings, we just have to drill an extra hole in the middle there. So there could be other blocks like rocket blocks and stuff like that may have the same thing. So just always make sure you got your oil hole showing. This would be a handy thing to have. Okay, so we're just loading all the new rods onto these quite worn pistons. We do have a new set of pistons ready to go in the engine, but they've still got a couple of runs on them, but the skirts have really been getting a hiding. And we haven't had any meltdowns or any real misses with the tune-up or anything, but yeah, we mark all our rods. When we get the rods, new set of rods, we mark them all, number ones, right through 2, 4, 6, 8, and that's when, if we ever have a cylinder go hot at the track and we send someone down to pull this up, we go, can you pull number 6 bearing? You don't have to, when you're upside down, you don't have to think, 2, 4, 6, So it's marked there, you whip it off, check the bearing, and okay, yeah, it's happy days, we're right to go again. So it's just idiot proof when you're in a rush. And same with all the pistons, they're all marked 2, 4, 6, 8, 1, 3, 5, 7. And if you notice how they're sitting in the rack here, one side of the car will lead off with the exhaust valve, and the other side, the heads can just spin around, they're identical. So then on the opposite side, you spin the head around and you lead off with all your inlet valves. So this is how I put them on the rack to stop me from getting confused. Another interesting thing with these, in the high RPM engines, they tend to move the pin up quite high and it gets into the oil ring. And the other main difference is that like a real budget engine would have a circlip in there, and like in the next stage up would have a spiral lock that winds in. where with these aluminium rods and a lot of Hemis and stuff like that, they just have a floating pin that it's not secured in any way. It just sits in there. Well, the ring, in this case, the ring actually supports it a little bit, and it's got a cutout there, so the ring supported the whole way around. But that pin basically just floats around in the bore. Has nice rounded edges on it, so it can't come out and nick the bore. So that's an interesting little difference between like when you get to a high end sort of deal. All right, remember we said in earlier episodes how the right-hand turbo was a little bit crammed up, and because of the cylinder head being placed back. I mean, 80% of everyone would know this, but we have a lot of cool young kids that listen in and bike guys and stuff. So yeah, we're just sort of covering that one cylinder head sits back on the car, and that's simply because each bank shares the same crank journal. So to get that, when you look down inside there, in order for each two rods to fit on the one journal, one cylinder head has to be set back a little bit. It's just interesting for people that haven't fucked around with V8s before. But yeah, on all V8s that I know of, pretty much the one head will be back a bit, and that can cause little dramas fitting stuff in. And this is how they oppose each other in the car. They go together like this with the flat side together. And that's a clearance a lot of people don't really worry about. In a factory car, you would have 12 thou clearance in there. I like to see more like 38 to 40, so the oil's pissing out of there and there's never any chance of these guys binding up. And then you'll also notice that have the bevel on the outside of the rod and flat on the inside of the rod. That's to match up with the radius on the crank, and that helps the oil escape out that's getting pumped in from the crank journal. So these guys are going 1,000,000 miles an hour, and that's why we like to double check all these clearances are nice and everything stays happy. It won't be okay, the bottom end's all together, all our soldiers are in, it's spinning freely. One of the last things we checked was the crankshaft end float. So this is the rear main bearing, and they have a nice little copper section there that if your torque converter on spool up is like expanding it all, or it's just like, it just does get a little bit of pressure put on the rear thrust. So we've checked that. It's around 5 to 6 thou, which is fine, but it's just something you monitor throughout. After a meeting, if we're checking bearings, we'll go in there. So you just nudge the crankshaft forward, put a feeler gauge in there, and just check on how this one's going. So it's nothing to take a couple of thou off that after a couple of meetings. It's deliberately got soft material there, but this, on the initial build, we just make sure we've got 5 or 6 thou. You could be 10 thou, whatever, but that's what we got as a nice starting point with the new crank. Also, a little bit of a shout out to our good buddy George at Blown Motorsport for lending us the 4.165 sleeve, because it's a very rare size. I think this one actually got machined up, and don't tell anyone we borrowed it, because I think we're just going to keep it. So just don't tell George about this. And finally, now we're going to stick the sump on. So before we stick the sump on, we always just have a little prayer to make sure everyone behaves in here. And now we're going to stick it together and go for it.
Seriously.
Okay, got all of the front accessories mainly on the motor now, apart from the fuel pump, which goes on once we're in the car there. Got the big 5-stage oil pump all bolted up with the mandrel off the front of the balancer, and we've got the crank trigger pickup on there as well for all of our ignition stuff. Another thing we've just started on before we put the heads on, we're putting the lifters in. So when we're putting the lifters in, obviously you've got to go over and check everything before you put it in. So we'll check for the rollers to be free rolling, and also if they've got cracks off the pins there, and make sure when we put them back in that they're all going up and down nicely, no catching. Because the last thing you want is for one of these boys to get stuck up and the cam to come through and wipe it out. So, yep, they're all in there nicely. We're going to put the heads on now, and then she'll start really looking like a motor.
On a Saturday, I believe. That shows so well how. All right, heads are all loaded now, all the rocker gears on. Even our lifters, our rockers, everything that we number, it's all numbered so they all go back in the same hole because they just feel happier in their own little home. So yeah, we mark everything up. And it also helps for when you stick the rocker gear back on, pretty much your lash is already pretty cool just to go for your first start up, and then you check it after that. So if you mix them up, you have to redo all the lash and everything again. Another little thing to note on this engine is it has 180 offset lifters, both intake and exhaust, and that's just to spread the push rods out far enough to get past this massive port on these AJ heads. So that's a great illustration of what the offset push rods are trying to achieve, to get past these big ports. So she's all torqued down, ready to go. We're going to get this intake manifold on. We're going to whack some new helicoils in the back here because they haven't got beaten up over the years before we put the trans back on it. But we've done 3 seasons with this engine. Same lifters, same valve springs, same push rods. Really, in the top end of the engine, it's been very well behaved. In recent times, obviously, we had to put a crank in it, some main caps, and bits and pieces like that. But the pistons are a thing we're going to change out shortly, and valve springs will be very high on the list. They're still showing good pressure, but that'll be something in the near future we'll be sticking on there. So let's get this manifold on. We don't wear rubber gloves, doesn't mean you have to. Don't have to. That's a bit of a lot. 10 degrees timing out for the first 1.2 seconds to make it one sort of thing.
Oh, you turned the key off.
Yep.
Okay, we've slung this thing in the rails. We've put fuel in it, we've got oil in it. And like as we've said before, don't take any of what we say about building shit. You know, we don't want to build your motor, or we're not trying to promote anything. We're just trying to let you know what we do in the shop. And we've slung it all in there, and it's time to play the game. Connor, you want to give that a little lick and see it?
the moment you've all been waiting for, and us too. Slimer's finally alive, finally purring back like it was in old Slime time. And yeah, it all went pretty well to plan, but it didn't go exactly like Dad said. We didn't just throw it in there and boom, it magically just started up. We did have obviously the usual few leaks and stuff like that, a little bit of stuff we needed to do in the computer to line everything back up with the new wiring and stuff like that. So apart from those few little things and a bit of head scratching that you guys don't need to see, it all went to plan. So pretty happy with how it all turned out, and it's looking really good for our next weekend. You want to stay tuned for the next episode. We're going to have full chassis alignment, setup, all of that sort of stuff, scaling the car, and might even see a few burnouts and launches. See you guys there. Like, share, subscribe, drop a comment. We'll see you next week.